All right. Good evening, everyone. The time is 6:02 p.m. It is Thursday, August the 10th, and I'm going to call this special City Council meeting to order. Would the City Secretary please call the roll?
Mitchell,
Here.
Tobias,
Here.
Heiser,
Here.
Flores Kale,
Here.
Zuniga, Bradshaw, Parsley.
All right, all members present. We have a quorum. Next up is citizen comments period. Is there anyone who wishes to come forward and speak? Seeing none, we're going to close citizen comments period. It's now closed. Agenda item number 1, receive a presentation, hold discussion, provide direction to the city manager regarding consideration of a defeasance option for a portion of the city's outstanding tax-supported bonds to manage property tax rate for fiscal year 2023 and 2024 and future years. Mr. Moheet.
Mayor and Council, we had a discussion at the last budget session about potentially defeasing some of the debt and the impact that would have on the tax rate and how that would work. So we wanted to come back with a detailed presentation to you to review all of these matters and talk about the direction the council wanted to proceed with. So I'm going to ask Perwez to get started with this. We also have the city's financial advisor and bond counsel here as well that they'll be assisting with the presentation.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, good evening. For the record, I'm Perwez Moheet, City's Director of Finance. If you recall, at the last budget work session on July 29th, when we presented the city manager's proposed budget, we also presented the city manager's proposed property tax rates. And during the deliberations, City Council, when we were talking about property tax rates, City Council requested that we look at a feasibility of keeping the property tax rate at the same level to manage the property tax rates. So you asked and staff put together information and brought in experts with us this evening. We have City Attorney Paige Saenz. We have the city's bond counsel, Stephanie Leibe. We also have the city's financial advisor, Mr. Mark McCliney. So with that, what we have planned for you this evening is we'll go over the debt defeasance option to manage property tax rate, and this will primarily be covered by our financial advisor, Mark McCliney, and city manager is available. I'm available to help him. And then we will go over the tax rate impact of debt defeasance. I'll primarily go over those slides. Here again, you have city manager available and the city's team of experts available to answer any questions. After we go with the tax rate impact of debt defeasance, we will cover the legal review and assessment of the debt defeasance. So that will be covered by our city attorney and our bond counsel primarily. They'll review the tax code and the defeasance option, how it complies with the tax code. Then we'll come back and talk about the resolution to record your vote. If you decide to move forward with the debt defeasance option, we'll talk about approving a resolution to record your vote. This is required by the tax code. And then finally, we'll go over the changes in the next steps. These are primarily for notices required by law and the dates that will have to change to accommodate the property tax rate adoption and the budget adoption. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Perwez. It's always good to be here. My name is Mark McCliney. I'm with Samco Capital Markets. We're in an interesting time in fast-growing taxable value as well as fast-growing population, along with a big capital improvement program that you have to manage over the next 5, 6, 7 years. So as we've started this process, I'm going to take us back perhaps a year prior to our bond election. We worked with City Council at the time to come up with what we thought was manageable to borrow, finance, and have a tax rate that would be able to pay that down, that the citizens could handle and accept, and obviously have an affirmative vote of the project if that's what they were willing to take. So at that time, our tax rate as it is right now was 50.82 cents. We came up with $294 million of new bonds for various road projects throughout the city. And at the time, we said it would take a tax rate of up to approximately $59.99, under 60 cents. That was the direction that City Council gave. We don't want to be above that, keep it below that. And so we were successfully able to manage it and plan for it. Well, when we were going through that process, we didn't know the exact timing of the issue and when the money would be needed, as well as how quickly we would continue to grow. So it was a lot of projections, and as we started this process, you'll remember in January, we sold the first set of bonds for the engineering work to get this going. And that was the first step. Well, we borrowed approximately $45 million to fund. We didn't know at the time when the second set of borrowing would occur. We believe, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but we believe the next issue will be next summer, perhaps this time next year. But there's a possibility that we're not ready yet, and it might be a second year. So as we started this process of working through the taxes, we have state law requires us to do it a very specific way, and it's through these tax worksheets. And you separate your M&O tax and your interest and sinking fund tax, your debt service tax. State legislatures given cities the ability to get 3.5% on their M&O from the prior year. There's some caveats there. New growth is treated differently, but basically, in an overview, you get 3.5%. You can get up to 3.5% more for your general fund without having really any issues with the voters. It's called the voter-approved M&O rate. On top of that, you get an INS tax. The INS portion of your tax rate can only be what your debt service is for the upcoming current year. So Perwez went through the calculations, and this is the 10 or 12 page worksheet that is statutory. I mean, it's provided to us, and we just fill in the blanks. And we came in with a tax rate that was roughly 47 cents. And that took into account our new bond issue that we sold last year. Now, what drove it to be below our current levels? Well, a super fast taxable value growth, faster than we were projecting, because we didn't know what the appraised value would be the following year. So, not a bad thing. Tax rates driven down, we've borrowed more money, not a bad thing. Well, if we go forward, we're going to be borrowing again, and we know eventually we're going to be pushing our way up to that 59-cent tax rate. That's what our overall, now, if our growth continues as fast, we may only get to 55 cents, but eventually we're going to be up above our current rate. So the idea and the possibility of a defeasance came up. So that's all background of where we were and how we got to, I guess, your prior meeting, your last council meeting. And the defeasance option came up, and we wanted to start having that addressed because it is a policy decision. So the first question, what is a defeasance? It's a legal action that takes bonds that are due in future years and makes them current. Current debt can be taxed. You can set your INS tax rate for current debt. So right now the calculation doesn't have any future debt because there's no legal action taken by City Council that said that future debt is going to be current debt. And that's the important thing. We make it current debt. Has to be a council action to do that. So what we're doing is we're taking future debt, that's what a defeasance is, and paying it off now. In my mind, and probably the easiest way to compare it is at a home, if you have some extra cash and make an extra payment on your home mortgage. It's kind of what it is. Paying off a car a little faster, you're paying down debt. It's important to remember, we, Perwez, City Council, Stephanie and me, we can't make that INS tax rate go higher unless you as a city council says, yes, that makes sense. And by the way, that's the first slide. So the second slide, why is debt defeasance option being considered by the city? Well, we're at a 50.5082 tax rate. Right now, it's going to move down under the calculations to roughly 47 cents. We know as you issue more bonds, it's going up above 50.82. So the thought, perhaps you might, as a council, want to keep the tax rate the same by paying down future debt, which does several things. It eliminates future interest, just like your home mortgage. You pay something off, you pay less interest. It helps build capacity for other bonds because you paid future bonds off, and now you have room for future bonds. It will slightly minimize the future INS tax rate that would be required because you paid that debt. So you're in theory, the defeasance, you lift the INS tax rate now to lower it later. Again, that's all a policy decision. It does eliminate some interest. So page numbers are on this, page 6. There's cost to do it, and it's roughly $25,000 to get it done. But you will save, because we eliminate interest, $51,000 of interest in year 1, and $715,000 of interest over the life. So cost get covered by the savings. The amount that we determined, and it was back and forth, and took a lot of reiterations to get it, how much we could pay was $2,345,000. So that number came about by saying, okay, we know what the M&O part of the tax rate is under the voter-approved rate for M&O. We know what our current tax rate is, 50.82. So that difference is what we can have. Well, you remember the tax rate that came out early was 47 cents. So basically, we had 3 cents that we could use to pay down debt. And that 3 cents would allow us to pay off early $2,345,000. So on page 8, if we do this, what's the result going forward? Well, as I said, it will give you more capacity. That capacity would need to be filled with a bond issue next year, because we've pushed our bond payments up. Now, if we are not ready to borrow, and no one wants to borrow money unless you're ready to go to construction. We don't want you to borrow and leave it in the bank, paying interest, and then sit on it for 2 years and then try to spend it. So if you had a project next year, the new bonds would come in and take that place, and we would be shooting perhaps for that 50.82 cents. Maybe at that point it goes to 51 or 52. Some of it will depend, a lot of it will depend on how much you need on that first tranche, or the second tranche. We just did the first. Now, what happens if we don't need it for another year, that bond? So we don't want to borrow. Well, you would be back in this exact same spot, saying, we want to defease bonds to build more capacity in the future because we know those bonds are coming. Now, instead of it being $2,345,000, because you grew another 15% taxable value, we may be grabbing $5 or $6 million to keep that tax rate at 50.82. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question. Since we are talking about the possibility of doing this for next year only, but we are talking in here about an interest. So when you're saying the interest savings will be about $715,000, that is just for next year.
No, in year 1, there's a great question. In year 1, it's $51,000.
Okay, so that's basically what we're saving. in year one. But because we are doing this defeasance just for next year, right? That's the commitment or not?
No, your commitment is only 1 year, but we're paying off $2,345,000. So all of the interest associated with that $2,345,000 goes away.
Okay.
The benefit for year one is 51,000, but it's every year until those $2,345,000 are gone. They're gone, but we're taking them out from 10 years away.
Okay,
So the interest on 10 years and 9 years and 8 years and 7 years and so on, that's a benefit for those next 10 years.
okay, and then have we analyzed what exactly is it, what do we owe that has the highest interest, that's what we will be paying?
We have two things. They have to be callable. We have to be able to take them from the investor.
Okay,
So now we're limited to the 2013
2013,
bond issue. Because those are the ones that we can take from the investor, the 2013s and the 2014s.
okay,
They are not necessarily the bonds with the highest interest rate, but they're the ones that have the power. We as a city have the power to take them from the investor without a penalty.
oh, I see.
We have to have the ability to get them from the investor, and we don't want to have to pay a penalty.
So basically, if we were to decide to do this, that's exactly what we will be paying.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So does that have to do with it being within a certain amount of years, which is like 10 and a half years? It can't go past that? So even if we have an older bond, we're not able to pay that down? Is that correct?
No, typically, and every bond issue has a little bit of differences, but typically when you sell bonds, they're not callable. We don't have the right to take them from the investor for 9 or 10 years.
Okay, I was just talking about for tax purposes.
It's spending down for tax purpose. We have to spend the bond proceeds in a certain amount of time, but the call date is something that when we sold the bonds, we said, you as the bond holder, Merrill Lynch, you bought these. We won't take them from you until 10 years from today. That way, they're willing to give us a better interest rate, because if you could sell them tomorrow, and you could take them from them 1 year from now, they're going to charge you a lot higher interest rate.
So then, are there any older ones that we could call?
I believe those are the oldest. I've got my book here, so the 2013 are your oldest bonds outstanding.
Okay, other than that, we don't have any other bonds
Not
outstanding?
older than that. There's you have 2013s, you have 2014s, 2015s, 2016s, and so on. But
Okay.
those are the oldest ones that are callable. Your 2013s are callable, and by next year, your 2014s will be callable.
Okay.
So yes, sir.
When would these bonds mature, the 2013, 2014? And if we prepay them early, what other cost are we going to have? You said 25 to do this. Does that include any other fees? And we're saving 50,000 in the year one to pay off 2.5 basically million in bonds.
Correct.
So the first question was, when would they mature to where they're no longer on the books?
So the 2013s are on your books until 2033. So now you're paying off some of each year. Each year, just like your home mortgage, you pay down part of the loan part and then interest. So each year you're paying down some. So we would grab the longest out, farthest away, and pay them off. And so the 2013s, they become callable. We have the right to take them from the investor next week, August 15th, 2023. So that's the first one that's callable that we could do this to. The cost to do it is $25,000. That includes legal, that includes getting a paying agent, an escrow agent, everybody that's involved to do this. The savings, because you're calling them, the savings is $51,000 in year one, but we eliminate the interest all the way to 2033. So the combination is you've knocked off 725 of interest over the life, 715, over between now and 2033.
But we don't get that back into our general fund, the
No, but it's,
715.
It's all on the INS.
but it's
It
money
only
that we
stays
wouldn't
on the
have to
INS.
pay.
There's nothing that can get over to your M and O, and that's statutorily. Our legislators in Austin don't want those commingled. They don't want tax-supported bonds or debt to ever get over to the general fund. Or part of the taxes for the INS to get to general fund expenditures. They strictly want those segregated.
So it is basically those 715, they're not gonna come back to us. We're just saving from paying that amount over the maturity of the,
Yes, and I keep going back, it's
Okay.
like a home, if you pay off part of that loan,
Yeah.
you're reducing the interest.
yes.
And that's what we're doing, we're just reducing interest, which you've taken the principal away, but you're also reducing the interest. We don't count the principal that you're reducing as savings, because you're using 2,345,000 right now to pay off 2,345,000 that's back there on the back end. So we don't count those future, that 2,345,000 as savings, we're only counting the interest savings.
Yeah.
Because you had to pay that 2,345,000 up front, they wash off one
Okay.
another.
Thank you.
So I have one more question. So if the goal is to pay down debt, as a financial advisor advising us, why would we not just take $2 million from general fund and pay that off and save the $25,000 plus other fees that are going to incur from non-essential items, and instead of calling a bond, or instead of paying off the bond and raising taxes?
Managing the tax rate. You know, when Perwez started this presentation, and that's why this is a policy decision. So because the legislature segregated those, the maintenance and operation has to be here, we don't want you using your general fund money to pay for debt. So keep the two, in my opinion, as a financial advisor, you want to keep your general fund reserves absolutely segregated. You don't want to use that for debt service unless there is a real emergency. So that's the first part. You don't want to use your general fund reserves for debt. Debt service taxes are the only thing that can be used to pay for debt service. Well, that's not true. Debt service taxes cannot be used for general fund. You can use, legally, you have the right from your general fund to move it to the INS side. But you're not, and you don't have any legal ability to move the INS tax to the general fund. So our opinion would be never to let those two cross. So since that's not, we don't have $2,350,000 just to be able to pay down debt out of the INS. The only way to do that is to have that tax rate. That is to use INS.
But we can't, if we wanted to, we could use general fund, okay. Because I'm just trying to find out what,
I would never recommend that, though.
I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around what is the underlying goal here? Is it to pay off debt? Is it to pay off debt to have more bonds? Is it to lower the tax rate? Is it to keep the tax? Because there's nothing that says when all these bonds for the road bonds have cleared that it's going to go to a 0.59. You stated that, so it could go to a 0.55. It could, I mean, because we just did what, 45 million this year, so we're starting to pay on that. So when all the bonds have been issued, there could be a good chance that it's not going to go to 0.59. So there's not a need to control the tax rate as much as we're thinking about right now, going from a 0.48 to a 0.59.
You are correct. There is, like your prior bond issue that went voted, you never got to the tax rate. You, as the city, never got to the tax rate we told voters. But as a financial advisor, as staff, as counsel, certainly we want to under-promise and over-deliver to your citizens because you're building trust with them. Citizens, we're not going to go past $59.99 for this bond issue. So we want to make sure that we're not directing you to do that. And there are times that bonds have gone over what they thought would be the tax rate, but we don't want to be in that position. So, like your last bond issue, you set a set number, you never got there. We don't expect to get there, but who knows what's going to happen in the future. taxable value-wise, growth-wise. Do we go, recession has been kicked out another year. Do we enter into a recession? I mean, by the experts saying, it's not coming in the next couple months now, maybe it's next year. Do we go into a slow growth period? Our crystal ball is no better than yours. We just go off the experiences that we've had here in Kyle, here in Central Texas, and just try to give you all the option. So you asked me, what's the benefit of doing it? Well, we know it will keep the maximum tax rate lower in the future because you're using it, you're paying down now. Is that worth it? I don't know. That's where the policy is, and I don't, you are cutting off interest, good thing, but you're going to have a higher tax rate next year than you otherwise would. Maybe that's a bad thing.
Do we know that for sure?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't do this, your tax rate's going to be, we've calculated 4693. That's what you will be next year. I think the calculations have been completed, final values have come in, that's where it is.
Isn't that lower than
That's lower.
5082?
Yeah, no, that's what we're saying. So your current tax rate is 5082. And so you're going to have a lower, under, not doing a defeasance, under the snapshot where you were last 2 weeks ago, was it 2 weeks ago, council meeting? That would be your voter-approved rate, taking into account all the outstanding debt. Picking up 3.5% on the M&O side. Taking into account the new bonds we issued in January. So that is your voter-approved rate. That's what drove this conversation in this meeting today was, okay, that's below where we are now. That's below what the voters have seen and what they've been paying for. We know we have $240 million of bonds left to issue. We know that is going to push us up above 5082. How far above, we don't know. But anything you pay off now, if you choose that, will be a lower tax rate if this is year one, you will have a lower tax rate than you normally would or would otherwise in year 2, 3, 4, 5, and out that, because you've paid off bonds. And now you've replaced that, you've left a hole. Any new bonds would come in and fill that, but you've lowered your tax rate. And our estimate that we ran earlier, over the long run, we think, and again, it's all kind of, it's not a science, it's almost, a mixing of chemicals, but we think it's going to be about a 0.5 cent reduction in your overall tax rate to your max in the future. So you're paying perhaps 4 cents more than you would to get to the 5082, but over the years, we think your tax rate's going to be about a 0.5 cent lower than it otherwise would be because of that.
I have a question about the 2013, 2014 bonds. You said that they will mature in 2033. So if we were to pay some of them, the 2 point something millions that we will collect from these defeasance, do we refinance those, or do we know what the tax rate, the interest will be? Is there any potential increase in the savings that we will have if we were to do that?
Can I tack on to that?
Yes, please.
When would they be fully paid off in this scenario?
Under this scenario?
Along with her question.
Okay, well, right now, we'll just use the 2013 bonds. If we do nothing, they'll be paid off in 2033.
Okay.
If so there's 9,875,000 left outstanding. So we're taking 2,375,000, we're taking the last two maturities off.
Guys, I just want to interrupt you. We've gotten some reports there were some problems hearing the sound, so make sure the microphones are being used. You may have to get a little bit closer, Mark. I personally have had trouble with that one myself, so I know how difficult that one is. We may want to get in a different one. Yeah. Every time I try to use it, I have trouble. So
I'm just glad you have a loud voice.
yeah.
Well, I know you all can hear.
Yeah.
That's your elsewhere.
That should be working in, if you would like to.
So
Thank you, Mark.
of the 2013s, there's 9,875,000 outstanding. They carry an interest rate, what you're paying on them, ranging from 3% to as high as 4%. Different maturities have different interest rates. We would grab, if you say, yes, this is something we want to do, we would grab the 2,345,000, the longest maturity. So we would take all of the 2033s, and we would take a majority of the 2032s. So they're the longest maturity, so we pay those off.
Okay.
They are off the books. It's not a refinance. You got cash, and you just pay them off. So there's no refinancing, there's no changing the interest rate. We often will come to you, and Perwez has done this many times, where we've refinanced existing debt. That's just like refinancing a home. You have $10 million outstanding at 5%. We come back and we now have $10 million outstanding at 3.5%. Interest rates have gone so high that borrowing right now is at a higher rate than refinancing these bonds.
Okay.
So did I get both the questions answered?
So basically, if we were to do this, we will end up paying this off by 2031, maybe? Ish? It's something along those lines.
Yes.
Okay, and those bonds that we still haven't paid, could those be refinanced at a lower interest rate or not?
There is nothing outstanding that you have right now that is also callable.
Okay.
Remember, we have to have the right to take them from the investor.
Callable for us to be able to even consider refinancing or anything.
And nothing's outstanding. Every bond that we have outstanding right now is at a lower interest rate than we could refinance.
Okay, that's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Perwez might can speak to this, but it's my understanding that the 2013 bonds were a refinance. Not that we issued the debt in 2013. It's not like 2013 was the first debt we ever issued.
It is a GO refunding bond, Mayor.
It's a GO refunding bond. So we've done that, and that's where 2016 number came through, where we saved interest by refinancing our debt. We didn't actually issue the debt in 2016. We didn't have any debt that we issued other than, we didn't issue any debt in 2016.
We refunded all bonds outstanding
Yes.
2 or 3 times
Right.
to save money for the city.
Yeah.
And I do want to say, I mean, so that's the GO refunding bond of 2013. We have a GO bond of 2013 also. Until you all say, this is what we want to do, this makes sense, we haven't called anything. We'll get the most efficient ones to generate the most savings to you all. And then your 2014s become callable in 2014. So we have 3 bond issues in the next year that we'll have this option to do.
So we're only paying off the ones that are gonna be due in 2023, is that correct? Or in August?
Well, it's the 3033 maturities, it's future maturities of the 2013 bond that becomes callable in 23.
Right, okay, so say we pay off this 2033, then we'll still have 2034 and 2036?
No, well, so I guess I'm a little confused on that question.
Well, it says obligations are currently outstanding in the principal amount of $3,385,000 and mature on August 15th, 2024, August 15th, 2026, and August 15th in each of the years 2027 through 2033.
So I think that must be the maturity, oh, no, that's the resolution.
We drafted the resolution under the assumption that the city, We drafted the resolution under the assumption that the city would be defeasing the GO bonds 2013, not the GO refunding bonds 2013. And so those are currently outstanding with maturities in 2024, 2026, 2027, and 2033.
The 2033s are term bonds, the 2033 are term bonds with maturities that pay off in 2033, 32, 31, 30. It is in the resolution, it was sold as one bond, but it has maturities each year.
And those won't be paid off, or they will?
We're going to pay off we're coming out of the 2033 and paying $2,350,000
But that's
coming
not the
forward.
full amount that's owed?
There's, of that bond issue, of the 2013s, there's 5,520,000 outstanding. We're going to pay off approximately half of those.
All right, so we're not gonna even pay the full bond off. We're just gonna pay a portion. So that's like me paying extra on my house,
Mm-hmm.
which is helpful, but the bond, my house payment's gonna be there unless I pay it all off.
But it will lower the
Sure,
bond
sure.
payment going forward.
That's totally understood. I just wanna make sure I grasp
Yeah,
that
no,
concept.
that's,
Mark, can you talk about when you were making your proposals on the timing of how much money we would be able to issue on these GO bonds for these roads that we're obligated? There was a schedule.
Yes.
That you were pursuing there. If we adopt this defeasance plan, does it have the ability to make an impact on how quickly we could issue future debt for these roads? And the point being, does it help us get these roads built faster if that was our only strategy, which I'm not saying it is, but
if it was your only strategy, issuing as fast as you can, since year one, in our preliminary numbers, again, there was not full engineering, there wasn't anything there. We had $75 million planned to be issued in year one. We issued 45. There's $30 million that is voted and unissued. Therefore, our tax rate is lower than what we are projecting. So if your goal was issue $294 million in the next 5 years, I'm not even sure that's practical because we can't spend it all, but if that was your goal, this will overall end up with a lower tax rate by about that half-cent tax rate, if I'm answering your question
well,
clearly.
so no, the way so our strategy for these road bonds has been that we issued all the engineering contracts up front, which means every road is marching forward. And there's gonna come a time when maybe not all of them are gonna come ready for construction at the same time, but 2, 3 of these road projects, within one fiscal year, we could be looking to issue, massive contracts. And so the calculations that you put forward said that we have to issue certain amounts of debt in certain years because of the tax rate impact. Like, for example, we can't issue it all on day one because that would blow the tax rate that we promised to maintain, and we wouldn't be able to accomplish that. So what I'm trying to figure out is, as it relates to our ability to handle 2 or 3 road projects that may come simultaneously in 24 months, does this help us with our ability to issue that debt?
Because we've paid off debt, it fills in, yes, it does.
Increases the capacity.
Correct.
Okay.
So originally, and I don't know if I may be talking around your question, but when we had the bond election, we were planning on 47 million plus be 76 million in year one. We did not issue all of that. Next year, we were planning 100 million, just in this model, and it was to get there. So from where we've been talking most recently with the construction, and again, everything's in flux, I think we had perhaps another year. I'm trying to make sure my dates are correct. We Brian, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I think we have another year before that 100 million would be hitting, 25 perhaps. There we go. So we still have programmed in, as of May 1st, 97, where we originally were going to be at 100. So it's still, but that still may not be needed at that point.
I think it's possible we won't need any bond issue next year, but then to your point about the timing, you could have in year 3 a lot more that gets issued.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's a
It's
lot
just
bigger.
massive.
And I think the policy question here is, I know this is very complex with all the calculations and issuances and all those kinds of things, but the real policy question for you guys is, do you want to try to manage the tax rate, keep it where it is so it doesn't drop significantly and then potentially has to go back up? And there is a tax, what people pay, regardless of the rate, what they pay. We're going to get to that in a moment. We're going to show you kind of what that looks like for the average home. But that's the policy question, is that helpful to have the tax rate not fluctuating a lot and not have to go from potentially 46 cents up to 55 cents or maybe 59, depending on kind of what the rates ultimately would be. We believe that the overall rates are dropping from a projected 59 cents to a projected 55 cents, somewhere in that neighborhood. And again, we're looking 3, 4, 5 years out, so it's difficult to know exactly what that looks like. But that's kind of the policy question that you're going to see that's before you. And one of the things I think we talked about as a group is sometimes we look at utility systems, you try to say, do you want to have a 3 or 4% increase on utility rates every year? Or do you want to have 0% increases and then suddenly have a 20% increase? And that's kind of it's a good way to think about it. It's kind of the same thing, but there's a lot of factors here. And we just wanted to make sure we came back to you, tried to give you all the facts. I think there was a little confusion on the staff when we presented this the other day, that we want to make sure you had all the information and could make a good informed decision on it. So hopefully that makes sense. It gets a little confusing when we talk about which bond issue, what the interest rates are, what's the present value savings, and all those kinds of things, but that's the core issue that you have.
I have a quick question, because, yeah, I completely get what you're saying. I think I would rather, as a homeowner, seeing my taxes kind of remain the same. I know we cannot control the appraisal, and, if the homeowner appraised higher, then we're gonna pay higher. But going lower, and then in 2 years, is gonna have such a huge spike, and that's when we're gonna see the uproar from everybody. What is the average increase according to the appraisals that we have seen that we will see if we keep it at 0.5082?
We're going to show you that in about 3 or 4 slides. We've got that coming.
Can I ask Perez a question to address that issue? I don't think it's working the way that she described, because your tax money that you pay still goes up, even though your rate goes down. The reason why it goes down is because your appraisals are more. The city is only allowed a statutory amount to increase. So we're not talking about we're losing money. We're not talking about we're even staying the same with money. We have increased our income by at least, 3% or 3.5% that the state allows. So if we continuously go up, the need to increase the rate is not going to necessarily increase as well. I think the problem is when you get confused with rate versus what you pay versus money that we receive going up or down, it kind of convolutes the whole situation. So it would be nice to see that in dollars and rates side by side. It's on there? Okay. But what I want to address is I don't think we're going to have the rate increase, because we're not going to, even if our rate stays the same, we're going to pay more. If we lower it, we're still going to pay more, regardless of what that rate is, either at the 0.47 or the 0.508, right? Is that correct? We're paying more in taxes regardless of what we do this year.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think the other.
I also wouldn't characterize this as a spike yet. If we haven't seen the peak, and we've already issued out 47 and then 70 million for these road bonds, and I just don't think financially we would be responsible to issue out 100 if we're not using it, like you said. So that I don't see those two working logically in the benefit for the city. To issue out 100 million and not use it.
But we don't want to do that, because
That's not being.
So the likelihood of increase.
That's not, I was saying the spike that will come in 2025, 2026. Whenever we issue those bonds, we will go probably from the if we were to do the 0.47 today, in 2026, we might have to jump to 0.55 or 0.59. That's what I'm saying, That's when we will see the uproar from residents, because the taxes will go up almost like 10 cents or something along those lines. So that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I think the situation is one where it's like, this isn't really even a question of, do we do this because of next year? It really is 3 years from now. It's not even the following year, it's the year after. Because if we pursue a community center GO bond, the voters approve that next November, and start that design comes ready for construction almost at the exact same time that the design for all of these roads comes ready for construction. So we could be in a situation where we have $200 million worth of projects ready to go, and we have to issue $200 million worth of debt. And that debt payment comes in as 1 year's lump sum, which corresponds to a massive potential tax increase. So this strategy is about saying, we know for a fact that these roads are coming forward in about 2 to 3 years' time with several huge debt issuances. And if it is our intention to go to the voters and ask for them to approve a community center bond as well, to put that in the same sequence, it is prudent of us to make the decision now to keep the tax rate level, understanding that we're going to have debt to issue over the course of it. Makes it much easier 3 years from now for that council to say, yes, let's go, because they're not having to weigh the political calculus of a 10-cent tax increase because we've been paying down the debt in anticipation. So political lump now for political favor and a smoother sailing ride in the future. For myself, I see the balance of that on both sides. We could say, you know what, we're not going to hold the rate level now. We're going to go ahead and go down, and then when the time comes, we're going to go back up. And that would be a commitment that we would have to make, and then we could walk that path. Or we could say, we're going to keep the rate now, the same now, so that it's easier on us in the future because we know we're going to do this. But if we kept the rate the same now and then didn't go for a community center bond next year and wanted to say we're going to space out these road projects until we can absorb it, there's no reason to do the defeasance. So the defeasance, as I see it, is a part of an overall strategy. 2 parts. Number 1 is we are committed when these roads are ready that we're going to issue construction bonds as they come in, as much as we can possibly do to get these roads rehabilitated. And number 2, we're going to ask the voters to consider a community center bond next November, which still will take 18 months from that day before we're actually ready for construction. So that's the calculus as far as I can see. And yes, there's definitely, I think both Daniela and Yvonne are both right. They're just saying it's just the different side of the coin. But for sure, the defeasance program does have an impact in terms of what people will pay this year in their taxes. They will pay more than what we have to charge if we don't pay the extra debt off earlier. There's financial arguments to be made that will save interest, but the reality is we are taxing more in order to save that interest and make those preparations. So we need to, these are long-term plans. It's not, these plans have to last longer than election cycles. These are 2, 3, and 4-year plans. So we got to be committed to it if we want to do it.
I think I've gone through everything on the issues. I think it gets to the actual numbers now, and that's, I think Perwez was taking that on.
Okay.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So Mark walked y'all through the strategy of using defeasance as a option to keep the tax rate the same for next year. So he's given you the pros and cons of the debt defeasance strategy. So now let's talk about the impact on the tax rates. This is the exact same slide we shared with Counsel on July 29th. This shows the certified taxable assessed valuation for 23 as compared to 22. We grew by almost a little over $1 billion. This does not include TERS 1, 2, 3, and 4. So just the city portion grew 20.6%. Just a refresher. So this is also a slide from July 29th when the proposed budget was presented to Council. City manager also had proposed tax rate that supported that proposed budget. So this slide shows that on July 29th, when we discussed the property tax rates, the M&O for the voter approval tax rate was $27.92, and the proposed tax rate was also $27.92. The interest in sinking, or INS tax rate, $19.01 under voter approval tax rate, and the proposed tax rate was also 1901. So combined together, the property tax rate was proposed at exactly the same tax rate as the voter approval tax rate. It was slightly higher than the no revenue tax rate of 4474, but it was lower than the current tax rate. So this is what we presented to council on July 29th. So when you incorporate the debt defeasance strategy as an option to manage the tax rate next year, and if council was to approve the resolution to add to the debt obligation for next year by $2.3 million that Mark talked about, the tax rate next year will be exactly the same as the voter approval tax rate of 5082. So if we were to do the debt defeasance, the INS rate will be 2291, M&O rate would be 2791, and combined together it's 5082. Now to make sure absolutely clear, if council was to move forward with this defeasance option, since we're increasing the INS rate only, and the total tax rate is exactly the same as the voter approval tax rate, a required election to get voter approval will not be necessary or required, because we're keeping the tax rate at the same level as the voter approval tax rate.
But we're taking away from our maintenance and operations? Is that how we balance it? That's what I'm asking.
That's calculated based on that tax 3.5%.
Okay.
So current tax rate 5082, voter approval tax rate 5082, and if council was to adopt the resolution for the debt defeasance, the tax rate will be 5082. No election required. So on July 29th, we also shared with you the average home taxable valuation and the average tax bill. So for an average homeowner in Kyle, Texas, the value in 2022 was $337,610. That same average home value in 2023 was $356,031. That was an increase of 5.46%, or $18,421. So you will see on this slide that we have compared what an average homeowner in Kyle, Texas, their tax bill would be if the 4693 was applied to the 2023 value. After the homestead reduction, the net tax bill would be $1,483.13, as compared to what the tax bill was in the year prior. So that's what we shared with council on 29. So if you were to take the defeasance option, so on this slide, the numbers are new. You have not seen this before. The first line shows with the defeasance that Mark talked about, and the council decide to keep the rate at 5082 for the same homeowner with a tax average home value of $356,031. After applying the homestead reduction, the average net tax bill will be $1,606.07, as compared to the proposed tax rate that we discussed on July 29 in the city manager's proposed budget of $46.93. Same home average value of $356, using the $46.93 as the tax rate. That tax bill is $1,483.13. So the difference between the two tax rate is $122.94 for the average homeowner in Kyle, Texas. So this is basically the slide that Brian was referring to earlier. So with that, the next part of our presentation, or you were going to add something?
Well, I was just going to say, again, I think that's, again, the policy question. I want to make sure I highlighted that for you on what people will pay versus the rate. You can see that on the slide. If there's any questions on that, we can try to answer that. The next part of the presentation is some good information, but if you guys want to go through all that on the legal basis for this, we can. But, you know, essentially, we've looked at that because of passing the resolution. It is a legal thing to do for the council. I think there was questions about that. We spent a lot of time with Stephanie and Paige, and you know, they have some information here. Questions?
I do have a question. I don't know if we have the answer for this. So I know the percentage that homeowners pay in general for the taxes. The city of Kyle is only maybe like 20% or something like
Right.
that. This is just 20% of what they pay in total. Do we know if the rate, and I don't know how they handle this, will increase for the county or the school district? Because what I'm thinking now is like $122 may not be a lot from us, but I don't know how much they are charging, and I don't know what the overall picture will be for a homeowner. Is that something we know?
We do not at this point. We are kind of ahead of everybody else.
Oh,
So we do not know what the school taxes will be, or ACC, or Hays County at this point.
Well, I do know on the school tax issue, I believe, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, there's a homestead exemption increase that's going to be on the ballot, I think, in November for Texas to consider. And if you do that, then that would theoretically lower the taxes for all property owners across the state of Texas. And was it another, I'm trying to remember off memory, 40,000?
No, it's gone, so.
Goes to 100,000, is that right?
For the school districts, it's kind of a two-prong approach that the legislature provided. And so homestead exemptions for school district taxes are going to rise from $40,000 to $100,000. And then the legislature also set aside some additional money for the school districts to lower their tax rate. And so for school districts, it's going to be a two-prong approach. And tax bills that are going to go out now before the November election are going out to the taxpayers with the assumption that the $100,000 homestead exemption is approved by the voters in November. And then if that election fails, then the county will have to send out supplemental tax bills to homeowners to
Oh,
cover
wow.
the delta between the two.
when do we need to make this decision? Because now I'm thinking about the overall picture. I know we're just a little 20%, but
Is it possible, if we were talking about keeping things the same, not necessarily the rate, but it says in 2022, the average tax bill was $15,1245. Is it possible to keep that bill the same and kind of create a rate towards that, so there's a true no change? And it's a difference of $29.32.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things going on in the housing of new homes coming into the market and those kinds of things, which kind of makes this not a real apples to apples comparison. The no new revenue rate is the rate that's been calculated to show no revenue increases. That's the 44 cents. That may be a slide or two before this one. But that's the no new revenue rate that you would need to have no change in property taxes at all. But you would collect the same amount of money as you collected the prior year based, even though the values changed. Does that answer your question?
Well, let me ask it this way. So it looks like for 2023, the average net tax bill is $1,483.13. Last year it was $1,512.45. Can we maintain that amount? So this year, instead of paying $1,483.13, we keep it the same at $15,1245, and then work around that in paying off the debt. So nobody sees a change in their bill. It doesn't increase, and the rate stays reasonably.
so it's basically doing this, a rate that makes sure that the amount that the homeowner is going to pay from the city portion is the same. So we will
Correct.
adjust the rate depending on the amount they will pay.
We would have to have a defeasance that would match that level of revenue, and it would be, substantially less than the 2.3 million. We'd have to do the calculations to see what that would be. If that's the council direction, we could try to do that.
would there not be a huge variable with the, not knowing the appraisals of the homes? I mean, I feel like it would be impossible to try to figure that out.
Oh, I see what you're saying, keeping all of it the same.
Well, and this
That's
is just
true.
the residential properties too. This is single-family homes, so it doesn't include multifamily, commercial properties, all those kinds. That's what the no new rep, that's what I was trying to discuss with the no new
No, I think what
revenue rate.
Ashley's trying to say, though, or Councilmember Bradshaw is trying to say, is it's hard to average that out per household as opposed to,
Oh, yes. Some people are going to pay more or
Yeah.
less depending on what their values are.
Okay.
That's correct.
So when I'm looking at the table, I don't know where you got the average home values, but people were taxed based off their appraised value.
Right.
Which generally is higher than the market value sometimes on comps sold. So these numbers look low compared to the listings I see.
These are the taxable values,
These are taxable.
right? And this comes from Hayes County. Their calculations, they look at all of the homes, what their appraised taxable values are, and then they average those back to give us these numbers.
Okay.
Pervez, may I add one thing on the school tax rate?
Yes.
No.
So
Go ahead.
a few years ago, the legislature raised the homestead from, I think, 15 to 40 or 25 to 40. And it does take a constitutional amendment, but it passed so overwhelmingly because who's going to go to the vote to raise their taxes? This is actually going to vote to lower taxes. So it's believed, just like last time, that it will pass overwhelmingly. So we don't think there's going to be a supplemental bill having to go out in January. Assuming all of that plays out, school taxes are going to be compressed themselves by about 10 to 12 cents. So school taxes are going to go from roughly $1.35, $1.25, down by about 10% themselves. So it's a big number.
I guess I need to ask another question. So if we did the defeasance, and you said we could basically pay off recall $2.5 million for 1 year, but then we issue more debt, won't that negate the advantage of trying to maintain the level tax rate? Because what's going to happen, and then in the future after that,
Well,
if we're issuing another 200 million in a time frame of another 5 years, which it normally takes to complete a project? So what happens then down the road?
your tax rate, in theory, is going to be higher. I mean, it's going to be, if you do this, your tax rate's going to be lower than it would otherwise be because you're paying it down. But it's going to, you're paying off a small portion and going to replace it with a lot bigger portion. And that's why, when we did the pro forma and projections on the bond issue, it looked like that it would take 59 cents to get to. Well, now we think it's going to be closer to the 55 cents because we don't expect 20% growth year over year over year, but we got it this past year. So, projections, the outputs are only as good as the inputs, but we know if we take out our future debt, that leaves a hole that is replaced with new debt later on.
is that new debt in your calculations, Perez?
Not on the tax rates, we're only looking, the tax rate only looks at next.
But
Sorry.
when we think about these, the tax rate, are we thinking about debt that we're going to incur in the future as well? And should we be
We can only set the tax rate for next year.
this year?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's why it's a policy decision, because it's the accounting, doesn't take those future debts into consideration when they set their rate. We know for a fact that a large amount of future debt is coming. And so the question is, do we want to keep the rate the same in preparation? Like, it's a prudent thing to do from the standpoint of planning, because if you think of the tax bill, yes, it goes from 1483 to 1600, but what we're doing is ultimately saving folks long-term. But we have to make that proactive decision now in order to make that happen. So I'm just on the side of, because I know that we have a lot of road bond debt coming. I think if we're committed to building a community center, this is the strategy that helps us to execute that in the best possible way. If down the road we decide, you know what, we're not going to do a community center, we're going to slow down on our debt, then we don't do the defeasance in, let's say, year 3, then the tax rate just drops. And all we did was save folks a little future interest along the way, and they get a massive tax drop. But I just don't see that as being the path that we've at least indicated that we're going on. So for me, it's a connection. If we're going for a 2024 community center bond, this makes that more achievable. If we are not going for a 2024 community center bond, then the tax increase that we'll have to do in 2 to 3 years will just be for roads. And that'll probably be fine.
Why wasn't the strategy done for the road bond? That was 290 million. That would have been nice to have this strategy shown, right? When the road bond was done, right?
The defeasance strategy?
Yeah, right.
I don't think
That was a year or two ago.
the defeasance strategy is really, in my opinion, is about the community center bond. For one, we didn't know that the tax rate was going to come down the way that it is being forced to.
Well,
So
and
we were-
Mayor, that's exactly right, but again, the plans, the thought was $70 million worth of bonds issued in year 1 for the streets. Well, it turned out we couldn't spend it fast enough, so we didn't borrow 70. We did 45. So if we did the 70, we'd be at close to that 50-82.
We'd be there right now? We issued 70?
But the strategy is, instead of borrowing it needlessly and paying more interest, we're not borrowing it, saving the interest, and then paying off other debt faster to match it all up with the numbers. Fiscally, it's a strong plan, but the argument can be made that we have debt that's not due, that we're having to tax people for in order to pay it early. And that's a philosophical question that everyone has to decide for themselves.
It's one of those things. Eventually, the taxes will come up. And so if it is in 2025 or 2026, it will be the council that is sitting then that will have to be facing with the 10-cent increase, because we're going to have to raise it, possibly, just to start paying for the bonds for the roads. We know it's coming. So do we want to make that increase a little easier and maybe pay that, and then maybe the increase wouldn't be as much just on the rate? Or do we just keep it low and then let whoever is sitting in there here in 3 years deal with the up-road?
Well, I agree with what you're saying, as long as we're not including new debt. So if we're putting a $100 million bond out there, what you're saying doesn't really correlate to future, like it's gonna go up, because now we're talking possibly a $100 million bond. So even if we pay $2 million, say we paid $10 million, what does that do when you have a $100 million bond coming on board?
I agree. I don't think that we should tie it to the community center. I think that is, I don't think that it should be associated like that. It should be looked at like, are we doing this to A, save money and interest, and B, create a more sustainable tax rate in the long run?
It doesn't have to be the community center concept. Just principally, we're going to have future expenses that we need to provide for the city, whether it's other infrastructure projects or amenity-related projects. It doesn't have to be this community center. But there are things that we're going to have to do to support our residents in the future. And whatever that is, whether it's a community center, a rec center, whatever you want to call it, or future road projects, we're going to have to borrow. So whatever it is that we're going to have to borrow in the future, doing this, from my understanding, would put us in a better position to not only manage the tax rate increase, so it's not going from something that's lower than expected to a skyrocketed number, but also it'll allow us to borrow, to be in a better position to borrow new money. Is
Well,
that
but
accurate?
Ashley's not wrong either. So the primary reason is stability of the tax rate and saving on interest, with the expectation of that we know without the community center that we have future debt issuances coming. The reason that I bring the community center up is because I think in my mind, if we didn't go this path, we're still gonna build those roads. So there's gonna be most likely enough political will to raise that rate up because we promised that we were gonna build these roads in the future. But what gets put in jeopardy is if, yes, we're gonna raise that rate up to build those roads, but then if we're raising that rate up to build those roads plus a community center, it's gonna put that future council in a bind in order to make that pitch. This is a situation where we can keep everything level now, save on the interest, and to Bear's point, create that capacity so that the decision to take the community center proposal to the voters and then actually deliver it is easier.
We don't know. November's a whole new month, a whole new council probably, who knows? But even in 2 years, we don't know what they're gonna wanna do. And the truth of that matter is, we shouldn't be making those kind of solidified plans for a council that may not wanna do that.
Well,
But
this-
as a homeowner in 2 years, I would hate to see a huge spike on my tax rate. So if I can kind of increase it, it's like we were discussing earlier today. When we make the contracts for the water, you have a certain amount of percentage that increases every year. Do you want that to be 8% every year, or do you want to have a rate right now and then in 2 years you pay 10% more? That's the way I'm seeing it. Do we want to soften it up right now and have it steady, pay left, and create capacity? Because we don't know if we come up with an emergency and we have to call for, borrow money for any other thing. But at the same time, do we know what the revenue is going to be next year? And maybe next year we don't have to increase it, or the year after. It wouldn't be that big of an increase to.
So I've yet to hear anything about a big spike that's planned. I mean, we know it's gonna increase, but I don't wanna make decisions based on, fear-based decisions. So I'm not done talking. So I would be a little more confident maybe moving forward if Perwez said, there is gonna be a big spike and we should do this. But I think we're all a little hesitant because we don't know. We don't know the value. I mean, also what happens if all the valuations of the houses go down and now we can't pay that? It's just a big risk, and I don't think I'm comfortable, for one, making decisions based not off of the residents' feedback. I think it would be good to put that to a vote to them. It's really hard times right now. Inflation is high. I don't think people can afford to continuously keep paying increases in not just their home valuations, but you also have in food and everywhere else. And you brought up a great point earlier, Councilmember Parsley, is we don't know what the rest of the taxes are gonna look like. We are just a little bit a piece of that pie. And I know we just had a huge school bond, was $300 million. And so being thoughtful to the residents altogether, I don't think it's fair to make an increase in their taxes. I would be okay sustaining, which I don't think we can do, but I would be okay with doing that. But it's just a really tough time for a lot of people right now, and I don't think it's a wise time to increase taxes.
Speaking as someone who is having a tough time, like all the other residents we're discussing here, I mean, the issue as I see it is, are we planning to be here long-term? Do we want to make decisions that are in our best financial interests long-term? And that's how I see, I'm not sitting here weighing how can I make life easier for a council in 3 years? I'm thinking, it's difficult now. It's going to be difficult next year and the year after and the year after. Life gets more difficult with every passing day. So if we're going to sit here and have a conversation about this and think that this decision is monumentally going to change the world, it's not. But what it will do is put us on a better path to be more financially responsible in the future, because we're not done growing. more money will have to be borrowed in the future. And this is the rub of it all, is do people, and if you put it to voters and say you can pay less today, but you're not going to get X, Y, or Z in 5 years, in 10 years, having lived here, you're not going to be happy. People, when I heard from hundreds and hundreds of people, face-to-face conversations about horrible roads. And they said, yes, you can raise our tax rate to pay for that. And the way that I look at it is if you guys already projected to potentially go up to what, 56 cents? Was that correct? 55 cents. If we keep it at 46 and then we have to jump it up at 10 cents, or roughly 10 cents, that at that point in time is going to be a significant adjustment for everyone's budget on a year-to-year basis. That is what I don't want to do, because I'm probably in the camp of thinking like, yeah, I'll take it easier today. If I can make today easier, then I'll sacrifice the future. But that's me personally, and I think we need to be looking at this bigger picture. None of this is comfortable, don't get me wrong. This is like honestly the hardest thing that I've had to do is weigh this, because we're not done. Like there's a lot more work to be done to complete what this city needs to look like to be the best for the people who live here.
I don't think that Daniela got her question answered. When do we need, what are you all looking for at this time? And when do we need to vote?
Well,
Sorry.
yeah, the question was, essentially, what's the timeline for making a decision like this? So let's go to slide 18. Unless there's any legal questions on the authority of doing this, I think we've probably covered that already, but slide 18, this one, go back. Yeah, so we had a schedule for adopting the budget to conduct the public hearings that would have concluded on August 24th. The new schedule is in the right-hand column on the new date, so that would have the budget being approved on September 19th. We're asking that the council consider a resolution this evening on whether or not you want to do the defeasance or not. That's on your agenda. I don't know what's the absolute last point they could do that vote and maintain this schedule, so I'll defer to either Stephanie or Paige on that of what would be the absolute last date you could do it, but we wanted you to consider it this evening.
Paige Saenz, City Attorney for the record. Would have to look to see what the absolute last date is. To maintain this schedule, though, and Perwez can correct me if I'm wrong, we would need action on the resolution this evening in order to be able to get notices in the paper for publication on the 16th. That's our first date to publish. If we were to not take action tonight and maybe save it for a meeting next week, for example, then we would need to change at least the September 5th date and push that back at least a week.
And there's some complication because the charter requires at least one of the, I believe, public hearings to be on a regularly scheduled meeting date, if I remember correctly. So this is hitting your regularly scheduled meetings for the rest of the way out on September 5th and the 19th.
I have a
It's a
question.
little complicated. I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's complicated with the tax code.
We planned our budget under the 0.469 something, right?
4693, right?
So if we were to adopt this, we would just have to adjust what we will be paying. Other than that, we will remain with the budget as we have it, because that's what we have planned. Here's the other part. I'm not trying to be a pain, but if the taxes will go, I don't know how much the school is going to be charging. I don't know how much Hayes County is going to be charging, but if they go up and we don't do anything, it's not going to make a huge difference for the residents, $120, because they will still raise it. Now, if there is a voter, if there is something coming up during the election to lower the rate for the school boards, you said, then that will make a huge difference on residents. And then I don't know if the 122 will make it.
The tax bill from school districts is going out with the 10 to 12 cent reduction.
Okay,
The governor, I think, signed the bill last night. So it is the school district taxes are going down by 10 to 12 cents.
I have a question. Councilmember Heiser talked about the future growth, which we all know is coming, and hopefully it brings lots of good things. Does that future growth help offset some of this future debt, or maybe the possible future rate? Would that also help decrease it?
Yeah, so we've made estimates, working with Mark and Perwez on new construction and new growth and appraised value increases in all of our projections of what the rate would be. If the value ends up being higher or the growth is higher than what we projected, yes, it would have a beneficial relationship with the tax rate, so the tax rate would be lower. Those projections would come down.
Because some of my hope for the future is that we don't have to bond out more roads. I think this council did a really good job with this bond covering the majority of the roads. And so my hope for future council, which I cannot impose on anybody, would be that they maintain the roads through CIPs instead of bonds. And a lot of the, especially with the possible increase in sales tax that the city would receive, I think that's doable. And we wouldn't necessarily have to go to even a 0.55 rate. So I guess it's like a double-edged sword, like we're talking about the growth and how we need to prepare for it. And then on the other side is that growth is coming, and what is that going to bring the city money-wise?
But some of the growth was already projected, right?
Yeah.
Into the 59-cent tax rate for the road bond. I mean, the financial analysis that was prepared before that bond election assumed conservatively some level of growth. So it's not
10%.
like, what's that?
I think it was 10, 10, and then 2 thereafter.
Right.
So we grew at 20% this year, which is causing all of this, but I think it will be at much closer to 10 next year because home sales have really slowed. So all these numbers represent the, explosive growth of last year as compared to the numbers we're currently seeing, which we won't discuss until next year. But it's not gonna be as high.
But the sales tax might be.
Sales tax is gonna continue to grow, yes, but it's, when you're talking about cash flows versus bonding power, it's just different financials. But, yes, I do think that there's a possibility that the actual final tax cent is close to what we currently have. Not necessarily 59 or 55. It could be 52 or 50.82. It could be the case that we never have to change our tax rate, period, because of increases along the way. But at the end of the day, what we do know is that we have to issue a significant amount of debt in the next 3 to 4 years. And if we decide 3 to 4 years from now not to issue as much, then there's a big tax relief there. But we're setting up future councils to have a plethora of good options. And the decisions we make today always impact future councils, always. And we had a period of about 5 or 6 years where the city council, while the city was exploding with growth, slashed their budget, slashed the tax rate all the way to the effective rate or the no net new revenue rate, put off CIP programs and set us back. It's been stated many times that we're 10 years behind on infrastructure. I've heard it many times. The reason we are 10 years behind on infrastructure is because 15 years ago, the city council of that day put no money into infrastructure. They put it all into tax reduction, including a half cent that they took out to the voters, and the voters approved to take a half cent of sales tax, which we would be collecting, but we don't, because we gave that away in the form of property tax relief, which is a fine strategy, but everything has an opportunity cost. That's all I'm saying. And my goal would be to see us in this period of explosive growth do what we need to do to set up future councils to have successful, to have options. Now, all that said, we have to be very clear, because of state legislature changes from 2 years ago and before, any vote for a tax rate above the no new revenue. So it's going to take 5 of us to pass the tax rate regardless of what we decide. Whether it's 47 cents or 50 cents, it requires 5 of us. So just, you have to be cognizant of that. So whatever decision we make, we're going to need to follow it through with the budgeting process and all the way to the end. So if we don't want to do that, we don't want to signal now that we will, and then a month later, change horses because public notices have to go out. We've just got to be consistent on this, whichever way we go.
Yep. Yeah, we're a little off script on our presentation, but I think to that point, that's, the mayor's exactly right. The law requires anything over the no new revenue rate to have 60% of the governing body approve that. So that's 5 votes that would be required. So that's either at the manager's recommended budget of the 4693 or the 5082, you have to have that. But you also have to pass this resolution creating the defeasance program of the 2.3 million. That only takes a simple majority of the council to pass it, so 4 votes. But again, you have to have 5 votes to set the tax rate, and not only for tonight, but through the rest of this process. So if you had 5 votes to set the defeasance program and indicate the tax rate that you wanted to have this evening, but then only had 4 votes to actually levy the tax rate and set the budget on September 19th, that would fail, and we would go back to the no new revenue rate, but it would be a worse situation, because then you would have already created the defeasance and increased the tax rate on the debt. So you would have to make a change to the M&O rate, and the general fund would have an impact related to that. So it's a little bit of some quirkiness in the tax code and how that works, but the bottom line is, as the mayor said, whatever the decision is of the council this evening, it's important to have that all the way through. Otherwise, it does have financial impacts to the city. So Paige or Stephanie, did I misstate any of that? If I did, please correct me on that. I just want to make sure I laid out that policy correctly to the council. Okay.
So do you need, what would a motion look like for, in favor of or against a defeasance?
So I have a thought as to how we should do that, because it could pass 4-3, which would set it up to fail down the road. My thought would be to actually have a roll call vote to open up the item, which is like a straw vote. So if you're in favor, you take a vote yes to open up the item. We let that vote go, and if that is a 4-3 vote, then we need to just kill it one way or the other and not move on. So it needs to be, the vote needs to, it's a straw vote, essentially, to open up the item. And then if 5 votes open it, then we can just vote on it the same way and actually approve the ordinance.
Do you want to make that motion?
Well, we only have 6 members here, so let's let that guy.
When you say open, it will be to,
Consider the item.
okay.
All right, I'd like to make a motion to open up agenda item number 2. Is there a second?
Second, yeah. I was waiting for a roll call.
All right, motion by the mayor, seconded by Councilmember Bradshaw. This will just be to take up the item. Roll call vote, please.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Heiser,
Yes.
Flores Kale,
Nay.
Bradshaw,
Aye.
Tobias,
Aye.
Parsley,
Nay.
Zuniga.
Yay, just to discuss it, right?
It's to open up the item, but what we don't want to have happen is, so motion carries 5-2. But what we don't want to do is call the vote and the vote carries 4-3. Because if that happens and we go and take the vote down the road, it requires a 5-2 vote.
I think both Paige and I are trying to jump in. So Paige, you want to?
I just want assurances of next year. If we do this is the 1 year. What does it look like next year? I guess on the tax rate, if it comes high or low. I mean, we don't know.
Well, I think
I
if
don't
we,
want to tax high and then tax high again next year. Now we're just doubling taxes.
I think from our position on this is that the rates are going to go higher with the assumed bond sales that we have. There's a chance that we won't issue more next year, and so you would have another defeasance that you would need to do next year to maintain the rate again. But I do believe in that year 3, that there will have a much larger bond issue be associated with that. And so that's, I want to be clear about next year, is most likely there would be another defeasance is what we'd look at. I can't tell you what the amount would be. It might be something similar to this or higher. It might be 5 million that we'd be asking you to do. But the strategy about maintaining the rate and trying to minimize rate increases is the question for the council. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. A little more clear.
I just want to make sure everybody understands the importance about, or the information about that it takes 5 to adopt the tax rate ordinance in September. It takes 5 votes. And so, as the mayor said, if you don't have 5 on the defeasance, you've still increased your debt obligation, and you'll have effectively adopted that higher debt service rate. And that'll be a component of your tax rate that you're adopting in September. And you won't be able to, if you want to lower a tax rate from there, you're just lowering the maintenance and operations. You're lowering what impacts the general fund at that point. So that was the reason for the straw poll vote, to see, before you commit that action, to get an idea of where are people on this. And so if there's a desire to reconsider that vote that you just took, you can use that procedure to reconsider that vote to open up the defeasance agenda item.
I just want to say that perhaps a little bit more, straightforward. It would do it would have a negative financial impact to the city's general fund if you were to pass this ordinance, do the defeasance program, but not have the same vote for the tax rate. If you don't have 5 votes for this all the way through the process and you get down to the end, it will cause financial harm to the city because of that. So that's what we're saying, is the general fund would be impacted. The programs, the types of services that you're providing, they're impacted by that if you don't have that vote all the way through. So we just want to make sure it's on the record up front for everybody that if you do the defeasance, there's an impact that needs to be followed through to the tax rate.
And can you remind me?
Does that make sense?
When do we need to vote for the creation of the defeasance? Tonight?
Tonight is what we're asking. That's correct. And
So basically,
there might be a chance to have a special meeting, but to meet all of the
If it
postings and public.
passes, we have to stick with the vote all
Yes,
the way
ma'am.
to the end.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
So it's not somebody voting yes and then voting no at the
Right. I just want you to choose carefully and vote how you need to vote on the issue. But I want to make sure I think it would be a mistake to vote yes and then to plan to vote no, or to change your mind and vote no. They need to be kind of thinking about all of that together, would be my recommendation to you.
Brian, may I add one thing that will
Yes, sir.
put dollars to it? If you defease and don't have a 5-2 vote for the tax rate, it will cost your general fund $2,345,000.
That's right.
You'll have, that's the
That's
dollar
it.
amount that would have to, because you've called the bonds, $2,345,000 is what's being called. We don't have the money from the INS tax, so it has to come from the general fund.
All right. Agenda item number 2 is up. I'm going to make a motion to approve. All right, motion by the mayor, seconded by Councilmember Bradshaw. Roll call vote.
Zuniga,
Yes.
Bradshaw. Heiser,
Yes.
Tobias,
Nay.
Parsley. Flores Kale. Mitchell.
Nay. All right, motion fails. All right, there we go. We got our answer. What now? I don't think we need the rest of the items, do we?
We do, yes, sir. We do need to go to, I believe, the request for item 3 would also not be needed, correct? Paige, I believe that's correct. And then item 4 would be consider did I misstate that? Pervez?
Item number 4, the revision of the budget calendar still needs to be voted because the public notice dates have changed.
Okay.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I was still just processing. I wasn't listening. I'm sorry. I was staring right through you.
Item 4 needs to be read and considered, Mayor, because of
All right, next
the
up is agenda
calendar.
item number 4, consider approval of a revised calendar for public hearings and reading of the ordinances for the adoption of the city's budget and property tax rates for fiscal year 2023-2024.
So the request would be that we have a budget work session on September 5th. Would that also be the public hearing? And then on the September 19th meeting, we'd ask you to formally consider approving the budget. Did you have something else, Paige? We were all just trying to get back on script, so.
Do you need more from us or just, all right, motion to approve?
Can you repeat the motion?
It's revised calendar.
It's the setting the calendar.
Second.
Motion by the mayor, seconded by Councilmember Parsley. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed. Motion carries 7-0. Next up, agenda item 5, consider approval of amendments totaling $847,736 to the proposed budget for fiscal year 2023-2024, increasing appropriations for total proposed expenditures by $847,736, reducing the appropriate proposed ending fund balances by $847,736 to fund the following additional budget items: $180,000 additional funding for Uber 314 program, $89,257 for one new animal control officer position, $117,609 for one new code enforcement supervisor position, $234,775 for two new street maintenance technician positions, and support costs for a curb painting program, and $256,095 for one new director of utilities position and support costs.
Okay. Mayor and Council, as we've continued to look at the organization and had some additional discussions with you over the last few weeks regarding the budget, we wanted to bring these items back to you for consideration. The first of those is to take a look at the Uber program. Jerry has some slides on that. I know there were some questions about the level of funding for that, so we wanted to present that to you and ask that the budget be amended to provide more flexibility going forward for this coming year. Jerry.
Mayor, Council, Jerry Hendricks, Assistant City Manager for the record. This item is to ask Council to amend the City Manager's proposed budget by $150,000 in additional funding for the Uber program. After the last meeting, we went back and we looked at the budget, planned out what our actual funding allocation will be next year to fully fund the program. Before we get into that calculation, just a quick summary of the history of the program. The program started in 2020. The initial launch was just the Uber 314 program, which provided 8 rides per month, where the riders paid the first $3.14. The city paid the next 10. Anything over that was charged back to the rider. The program was well received, and the next budget year, the council added additional services. They added 2 additional rides to the base Uber 314 program, increased the service area for that program, also added 2 rides to and or from the airport, where the rider pays the first 32% of the ride, the city pays the rest, and also added rides to the VA clinic for our veterans that needed to get to that service in South Austin for their health. We also added an additional program for ADA assistance, where people requiring wheelchair accessible vehicles could actually call and make an appointment to take those rides to anywhere in the service area. And all those programs have been very well received. Next slide, please. So in 2022, it was the first time we are projected to exceed the $230,000 originally budgeted annually for the program. You can see the chart there that shows year over year the increases in rides and the increases in cost. So we have put an extra $70,000 in next year's budget, but realize now that as the program continues to grow and gain in popularity, and with the additional cost for the ADA component of the program, that we'd like to request an additional $150,000, bringing the total budget for next year to $450,000 for the Uber program. I'm available for any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I have lots of questions. So before I can vote on this, I just need to make sure that we have the correct numbers. And I wanted to confirm, Brian, did you review this as well?
I did, yes.
Okay. All right, so my first question is going to be, the first year, fiscal year 2021, there was nothing except for Uber rides, correct? So there was no airport, VA, or ADA?
Correct.
Okay, so I guess I'm kind of confused as to why fiscal year 2021, Uber states there was 2,900 rides, but when you go all the way to the bottom where it says grand total for all rides, it says there was 7,377, and they have a cost difference of approximately $30,000.
I have to go back and review my notes, but I took these off of our monthly reports to make these calculations.
Yeah, and those monthly reports come from Uber?
They're compiled by me based on information I get through their dashboards.
Okay, so that's a concern because it seems to be off by a couple thousand rides. And in justifying, trying to figure out if we need to increase these rides or not, and the financial aspect of it, I need to make sure it matches. The next issue I see is if you take fiscal year 2022 to 2023, if you take all those costs in the different categories, from Uber to airport rides to VA rides to ADA rides, the grand total it shows is $119,639. When I took my calculator, it was $161,009.18. And the rides are also off. So if I added up all the rides for fiscal year 2021 to 2022, it gave me 10,578 rides, which is off by 309 rides, which is exactly what's under ADA rides via MT Connect.
I'll be happy to go back and recheck the formulas that I have in my spreadsheet. But I did double check these.
All right, and then I believe my last concern has to do with airport rides versus ADA rides. So in fiscal year 2021-2022, there was 1,330 rides from the airport with a cost of $41,369.73. Fiscal year 2022 to 2023, it's 2,114 rides with a cost of $63,909.05, which is the exact same amounts for the ADA rides via MT Connect. So my question is, how are these numbers the same unless all the riders that were going to the airport were ADA accessible and all the ADA accessible rides were going to the airport?
I don't have numbers on the AD rides, how many of those went to the airport. I just get mileage and the total dollar amount. I'll be happy to go back and double check that and bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the numbers, it's very unlikely they're the exact same. There may be a misprint here that we can go back and take a look at to see that they would be the exact same in both categories, but we can take a look at it.
So the difference in the years for fiscal 20 year 21-22 is $41,370.18, which is approximately the same as either fiscal year 21-22 for airport rides or fiscal year 21-22 for ADA rides. So I don't understand how the airport rides for 2022 and 2023 are the same, and so are the amounts. So if it's an ADA ride, it's going to cost more versus going to the airport.
I'll have to go back and review these numbers, but
And maybe as we go into some of the other items here, maybe Jerry can take a look at that spreadsheet and see if there's an error that we could come back and update you on,
Okay.
perhaps.
So my follow-up question, is there opportunity, for us to be getting double charged, Jerry?
No.
From fake riders, or I guess someone going to the airport and charging two ADA bus and airport, right?
no, those are totally two different platforms.
So normally what residents will do, they will go to our website and get a voucher, and then we get the bill from the Uber rider, correct? Is that how it is?
On the platform, the Uber platform calculates the rides per month.
Okay.
And the payment made by the rider, and then bills us at the end of the month for the
Okay.
balance.
So I was looking, because I know you have mentioned that before, that you wanted to increase the rights, and so I needed to have a better understanding if residents were using it. I was very surprised and happy to know that they are being used to the right places, like they're going to either the hospital or HEB or places where we have retail. So, I mean, it's obviously people that are needing these rights. So I am completely fine approving the increase, especially because that increase is only going to happen if the
The rider
people,
actually take
if
it.
the rider actually uses the ticket. I have a friend of mine that it's partly blind and she swears by Uber. So now I go to your point that you don't want to cut those rides to only 10 rides a month if somebody really needs it, because at the end of the day, if somebody doesn't need it, they're not going to get the voucher. So with that, I would like to make a motion to approve the increase of 150 for Uber 314.
I'll second that, but I also wanted to make a comment. I know a resident that is on a wheelchair, and we do not have carts in the city, the van. So this ADA Uber program is
They can
very
use- she can use
beneficial
that.
to these residents
Okay.
that don't have that ability to just get in a car themselves, and we don't have carts
That's
transport.
right. That was actually the genesis of this program, was helping people that are ride challenged or ride dependent. And it's an added bonus that everybody is able to benefit from this program.
Thank you, Jerry, for providing us the map of where they do go, like Daniela was asking for.
Well, I do have some concerns. Uber is a publicly traded commodity. And in the event any of these numbers are incorrect and they're using those numbers, that will have to be shared with the stockholders. So before we make a vote, I think we should think long and hard whether or not these are true numbers and whether or not we should consider it without, with the concerns that have been addressed.
Just so I understand, I get the numbers, but Uber being a publicly traded company, you're saying what?
So in the event there is like some kind of fraudulent within the system of Uber, and we as like, they say, for example, they say, hey, the city of Kyle uses us for XYZ. And in the event that there's something underlying issues, then they have to release that to the shareholders. So before we move forward on doing it, I just want to make sure we have the correct information and that we're in a safe place. That's my concern. It doesn't have to be anybody else's concern. It doesn't have to stop you from voting. I just wanted to make sure that I addressed my concerns.
I don't have any concerns about publicly traded companies.
There is a motion on the table.
Call the question.
I just want to say one thing real fast. I'm in favor of this increase, but I do think that moving forward, we need to spend some time figuring out how to market this appropriately so that we can maximize the value to the resident. I think that's really important. We can increase funding for things all day long, but if people don't know that it's available for them to use, it's just an exercise in futility.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
Thank you. I'll restudy these numbers in the next week's Friday report. I'll set an update.
Can I also have the backup that shows the numbers for each? I would appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll be glad to provide that to you in the Friday report. We'll send that out. Okay, the next item that we have on the list of the budget amendments would be for an animal control officer out of the general fund. I know we all had a discussion just last council meeting about some of the challenges that we have with a particular case. We've been looking at that, agree that there's certainly things we could have done differently with that. One of those things that we've been looking at is just the level of cases that are coming into our animal control operation, the number of staff that we have, and their ability to keep up with that demand. And some of the things that I've been seeing across the board in the city is, as the city's grown, the number of requests that are coming in have gone up exponentially. So we do have some data in here we want to show for this, but this would be adding a new animal control officer position. It's about $89,000. Pervez, if you could help me go through this a little bit. So a couple slides up. Thank you, keep going. So this would be a fourth animal control officer. Again, trying to be more proactive about enforcement is one of the things we really wanted to try to do with this. It would allow us to maintain some minimum staffing and have 7-day-a-week coverage, and that's one of the things that I know we've heard from the residents on is that's important. So this would allow us to do that, have some extended coverage for the evening hours, and allow staff to do even more training. We've had some discussion with Ms. Katz. In fact, I believe the chief had a discussion with her just yesterday, I believe, and are looking at doing some type of training going forward. So this is kind of trying to have that holistic approach to this of having some more staff, better training opportunities that we would have moving forward to have better outcomes. So that's the first piece on the animal control. We do have a number of calls that we're showing here, and we have some graphs that will show this on the next slide. Yes, so from 2014, calls have increased from 3,500 calls in 1 year to 4,000 in 2022. They've responded since just January of 2023 to about 2,100 calls already. The staffing for the division has been 1 to 2 officers to handle those call volumes. And we've also had to, when we take animals over to San Marcos to the regional animal shelter, that does take a lot of time on that return trip. And I know Brianna and the chief can talk a little bit about that in more detail. In addition to the actual animal calls that we get for service, there's also lots of informational calls that are coming in. You can see those have grown over the past few years as well. Bite cases, you can see, keep going, Pervez, if you can. I'm flying through these now. Bite cases continue to be a significant caseload for all of our staff as well. And then we do have a number of training classes and activities that the animal control officers are trying to take care of. These are all the things that they're doing on an annual basis. So I'll ask Brianna, the chief, to come up and address the training just briefly.
Hey, good evening. Jeff Barnett, Chief of Police, for the record. One of the best things we do at Kyle PD for all of our staffing positions is we offer training, and we try to create in-house experts. That's our goal. When we have somebody in a position, we want them to become an expert that other agencies can rely on. We want them to be that well-known and that resourced. You can see here from the list of trainings that you have before you tonight, these are the trainings that we ask our animal control officers to attend in addition to doing their duties. And you can see we have a very robust field training program. That's where the new hire comes in and they work with a more experienced animal control officer. In our case, that's Brianna. She trains all of our new ACOs. We conduct a number of in-house trainings throughout the year, and you can see we have a list of classes. I'm going to ask Brianna if there's any that she wants to highlight, but you can see that we do take training very serious at our PD for all positions. And I know it's come up in recent meetings. Do we train our ACOs? If so, what kind of training is that? We've compiled a list of what we currently use, and we are always looking for good training. City manager mentioned to you that I met with Robin yesterday, and we had a very, very good meeting. I do believe that she and some of her field experts offer some very valuable training in the area of animal control services and the treatment of animals, and she may have mentioned that it even branches out into some of our criminal law enforcement. So I think we're going to definitely take advantage of that as well. But I did want to report back to you that I did meet with her, and I think we had a very, very productive meeting. And you'll see us collaborating with her and other professionals in the field, not just her, but other professionals in the field as we continue what you see on the screen before you, which is a very robust training program. Okay, yeah, we're good unless you have questions. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to say that I know Brianna has been stretched thin, and I acknowledge that during that meeting. I think that it was kind of unfair the way that things went through. And I really dislike the pure pressure we got about training, not even knowing if training was the issue. I know that you were almost like a one person working for the whole city. So is it really training the issue, or are we letting somebody like really push us to get more training? Are we gonna get anything beneficial other than what you already know? I mean, it's free.
So I do think we will, if it's okay, Mr. Lang, I'll answer it. I do think we'll get some beneficial training because it will not only encompass animal control service duties, it will not only be for animal control officers, but it will be an awareness level for our police officers as well. So we try not to call our animal control officers out after hours and when, on the weekends, but this will obviously fix that, unless we just have to. But we do want our police officers that are the first responder to some of these calls after hours to know the basic laws, to be able to recognize signs of animal cruelty, and to know when it is important enough and urgent enough to call out an animal control expert. So I think the awareness level training that we're looking at with not only Robin, but other professionals would certainly benefit the department as a whole and give us the ability to provide better services.
So the one thing I would like to get, if it's okay with Brian, and you can provide that, is the type of training she's going to give, the hours that the training is going to take, just to see if it's really beneficial. That's
Yes, ma'am.
something you don't have. And I would like to make a motion to approve the budget amendment for the additional animal control officer.
Second.
Our motion by Councilmember Parsley, seconded by Councilmember Flores Kale, that we approve the new animal control officer position. Is there discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
And thank you for adding that another officer to, that would definitely help increase services.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And I think continuing on with that discussion, one of the other things that we've been looking at is code enforcement. So some of you may know that Brianna, in addition to being our animal control supervisor, she was in charge with managing code enforcement as well. We've had a lot of discussions internally about how to do both of those things well, and we believe we need to separate those two functions and to have a new code enforcement supervisor position. So that's the next item that you have for you for consideration. And this would allow Brianna to focus exclusively just on animal control services. So not only are you getting the additional new position that we just talked about, but a big portion of her time will then be freed up to better focus on those jobs. And again, I think Brianna's done an outstanding, everybody's always behind me here, so it's hard to find her, but I think she's done an outstanding job of trying to juggle a lot of different duties and responsibilities. This will give her a chance to really focus on something that's really important to the city and a growing need. And then additionally, the code enforcement function is also in need of more resources. So this supervisor position will help us focus on code enforcement. We're recommending that not only to add this supervisor position, but to change where it also reports to. Instead of reporting up through the chief of police, it would report to beautification services, which is under Chance. So that's the recommendation for you here. Again, I think it helps us both from a code enforcement standpoint and animal control, and really helps us to really advance two initiatives that are really important: beautifying the city, keeping us up to code, and also focusing on animals.
Motion approved.
Second.
Motion by Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Flores Kale. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Again, I just want to say thank you. To anything that helps to provide great service to the community.
I appreciate that.
From code and animal control.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
All right, continuing on, street maintenance technicians. This is for the curb painting program. I know that we've talked about that at the last meeting on, I believe, 29th, I think it was, about talking through this. So we went through and looked at what would the cost be for that program. So this would include 2 new staff members, all of the equipment, the paint, obviously, and the equipment. I think there's a machine that's used for the curb painting program. So this is the cost for that, to meet that objective the council had about trying to have more clearly delineated areas where parking's allowed, not allowed, and to keep those curbs painted freshly and make sure they look nice.
Brian, if we approve this, would there be a policy brought forward for us to consider so that we would know where things get painted and which portions of town and
Yes,
all
sir.
that?
I think that's a great point. We definitely need to bring that forward to you so we could have a lot more precision around exactly what we're trying to do. So yes, sir, we could certainly do that.
I'd like to make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by the Mayor, seconded by Councilmember Flores Kale. Is there discussion on that motion?
I have a question. Are they going to be able to do any additional functions other than street painting?
I'll ask Harper to answer that question.
That's a good question, Daniela. Thank you.
Harper Wilder, Public Works Director. Yes, ma'am. They'll tie right into our street maintenance. They'll be part of our street maintenance group. So they'll tie right into them and help them out. Just so far, we've already found over 13,185 feet of paintings that need to be done, which is equivalent to 44 football fields in length. And that's not even getting our study back yet from our street study that we're going to anticipate having a whole lot more once that's complete, because there's a sign study included in that all of the no parking areas we're looking at incorporating.
Are you guys incorporating private streets?
No, ma'am, we didn't look at private, I'm sorry. All public in the right of way.
And I'm just wondering, because I'm assuming it will take, I don't know how long it will take to paint all the streets we have to paint, but then I'm thinking about years forward, if the position will, the position will remain for these technicians, and so I just want to make sure that whoever we hire has the capability of doing something else.
There's a lot of red paint, and I'm telling you, the problem with that paint is when the sun's out, and especially like it is right now, it's year round. That's going to fade, and then it becomes pink, and you have to constantly maintain it. So it's going to be over and over.
Thank you.
So I had a question. So there would not be red painting around businesses? Because I see a lot of them, like at Kohl's, HEB, those curbs?
Not on the private property, no, sir, because that's private property internal to the business, but everything that's on public right-of-way, yes, sir.
So
you drive
the
down
off-ramp of
Sanders.
35,
Sir.
that's paintable by the city?
Where I didn't,
Off of 35, the off-ramps?
those are
TxDOT,
TxDOT right-of-way. So TxDOT right-of-way, anything in TxDOT right-of-way, we'd have to get their permission to do something. Not saying we couldn't. If we did get their permission to do something, we could. But as of right now, no, sir. It's all city public right-of-ways.
Okay. Thank you, Harper.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 7-0.
All right, the last one I have for you this evening is a new position, a Director of Utilities. So as we've continued to look at our operations, both in Public Works and in engineering, we felt like something was missing for the focus that's needed for utilities here. I think, again, this is not about anybody doing anything wrong, but just really trying to wear too many hats, do too many things at once. And as the city's grown, we believe we need to have an individual focus on our utility system. So this would be for our water, wastewater systems, the reclaimed water, all of the plans that are associated with that. As you know, we're looking at a $100 million expansion for just the wastewater treatment plant by itself. We also have a new water source coming in, and we have a lot of infrastructure that's going to need to be built in this city over the next several years. So we believe that additional focus is needed for the utility function. As you look around at some comparable cities, as you get to a size, it's not uncommon to have a Director of Utilities position, and I believe that's necessary for us to manage these assets going forward. So I recommend it to you for consideration. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Was there so the reasons for the split in the Public Works, is it because you need to have a new position for that?
Yeah, I just think right now with Harper in Public Works and Leon in engineering, they both are responsible for different functions. So Harper's job is to manage the operations for water and wastewater, and I think they do a good job certainly with that. And Leon has a component of that with the engineering and working through the engineering elements of it. But it's gotten to be such a size and complexity, and there's so many functions that are there. And with all of the other responsibilities that Public Works has, I believe it's hard to manage all of that with just one director level position. So that's the reason I would recommend a more focused effort just on the utility function with all the areas that we're seeing in there.
And one last follow-up question. In due time, do you think this new position would need a new administrative staff? And if so, would they be located at Public Works or maybe in another area?
It's possible we would. I haven't anticipated that right now. Hopefully there can be sharing of the administrative staff. If you're talking about administrative assistants and those kinds of things, hopefully they could be shared. But over time, as the city continues to grow, it's definitely possible we could have some more of those that we might need.
Okay.
Right now, I don't have anything planned for that.
I'm excited to have somebody who hopefully kind of connects both departments. And I mean, especially when we were talking about bringing back that, the purple pipe, the water. I want to see that happening as soon as possible because I think we really need it. So do you think this position will probably oversee this project?
Yes, that's one of the things that we'd have them look at. That's complicated of how you get that infrastructure out to the right sites and how you deliver that kind of water. But yes, we definitely would want that to happen.
Reclaim Water Master Plan. I
Yes.
just lost it, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I want to see that happening. I would like to
Okay.
see if that position can see it all implemented without the hiring of any additional services.
Okay, we'll look at it.
Yes. I'd like to make a motion to approve agenda item number 5. Number 5.
Well, the
It's item
director
5,
position.
number 4, yeah. Okay.
All right, motion by Councilmember Flores Cale, seconded by Councilmember Parsley, that we approve the Director of Public Works position. Is there discussion on that motion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, motion carries 7-0. I do have an item to potentially add on to this, but I'm realizing the way it's written. Can we make a suggestion for an amendment?
Yes, sir.
On
That'd be
this
great.
item? So I've been having some conversations with Chief Taylor in the last couple days with regards to some of the challenges that they've had fighting these fires, as well as some of the other emergencies that they deal with. They are of the opinion that it would be greatly helpful if we had a trailer full of hazardous materials preparation. And I am not the one to make this pitch, just as an FYI. But they were looking into it, and they think it would cost around $50,000. This would be under the Department of the City, under our emergency management program, and the idea would be that Will would coordinate with Chief Taylor to make sure that they have essentially a trailer full of supplies that are ready to be utilized in an emergency. And so it could be like hazmat suits, it could be, I don't even want to try to explain all the different things, but it would be about $50,000 all in. So what I was going to ask, I just want to spring this on you later. So what I was going to ask is that we consider earmarking $50,000 for emergency supplies equipment, and then allowing over the course of the next few months for Will and Chief Taylor to talk about exactly how they would spend that. And then they could bring it back, and then we wouldn't be having to amend the budget, and we can also signal to them that we're okay spending this as a preparation for future emergencies.
I would like that, as long as it's an additional 50,000 and not coming out of the already created budget for the emergency.
That would be the plan.
Okay.
If I may add on that, because if you look at the situation that happened in Wimberley and then over here, and I like just pitching your head, the portable generators that they could possibly need in case they have to do an overnight stay somewhere, that could provide some form of electricity or something like that if we eventually get cooling tents for firefighters, so in that sense. And just to keep in mind those type of supplies, probably extra air tanks and just first aid kits, really.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, because, the example that they gave was in the fire we just had, the 15-acre fire that we just had. They didn't have enough water, and our Public Works Department had water tanks that we were able to bring over, which greatly assisted in putting that fire out. So the point being that even though the fire department is not a department of the city, we still share resources in times of need. So in my mind, it would be good for us to be stocked up, but it needs to be, because it's not just fire, it's also, gas explosion or any number of other types of, crazy things that are coming down the pike for us, because they are. All right, I'd like to make a motion to add $50,000 in the Emergency Management Department's budget for hazardous materials preparation, and direct our Emergency Management Director to coordinate with the Fire Department to bring a proposal for how best to spend that money. Second. Motion by the mayor, seconded by Councilmember Heiser. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, motion carries. That's it?
That's all we have for you
All right.
this evening. Thank
Motion
you
to
so
adjourn.
much for your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys.